For decades, official history maintained that the Americas never had contact with Europe before the arrival of Columbus in the 15th century, or even the Vikings in the 10th century. But today, an unexpected discovery threatens to change everything. In the Atacama Desert, a mummy belonging to the enigmatic Chinchorro culture, dating back almost 6,000 years, holds a secret no one saw coming, a secret that modern science has just revealed. European DNA, and not just any European DNA, but that of Upper Paleolithic populations, thousands of years before recorded history. How did it get there? Who were these people? And what does this discovery mean for the history of the peopling of the Americas? Before discussing the European DNA discovered in this ancient pre-Columbian American people, let's first talk about who the Chinchorro were. The Chinchorro mummies represent one of the most fascinating and enigmatic archaeological discoveries in South America. This ancient people, whose existence dates back approximately 9,000 years, developed complex mummification techniques that predate Egyptian ones by nearly 2,000 years. However, what is most intriguing is not only their age, but also their purpose and the meticulous workmanship of these bodies, which leave questions and challenges for archaeologists and historians to this day. Imagine the ancient Chinchorro inhabiting the arid shores of the Atacama Desert, a place so hostile that it barely allows life. Yet this civilization flourished on the shores of the Pacific Ocean, in what is now northern Chile and southern Peru, facing a desolate environment with virtually no vegetation. So, what prompted these ancient inhabitants to develop such advanced techniques for preserving their dead? Mummies are often thought of as a legacy exclusive to Egyptian civilization, but the Chinchorro's method of preserving bodies is not only older, but also radically different. In ancient Egypt, mummification was reserved for the elite and royalty, who, according to their beliefs, needed to preserve their bodies for the afterlife. But in the case of the Chinchorro, mummification does not seem to be exclusive to royalty. Mummification includes the elderly, adults, young people, children, and even fetuses. This rare and unique aspect is unparalleled in any other mummification culture of the ancient world. The Chinchorro technique is undoubtedly one of the most complex mummification methods of antiquity. Their practices include two main methods: black mummification, dating back to approximately 5000 BC, and red mummification, around 2500 BC. In the black mummification process, the body was dismembered, its organs removed, and the skull cut and hollowed out. The bones were then reconstructed, and the limbs were reinforced with reeds for support, before being covered with a white ash paste that simulated skin. The final touch was the application of a black layer, possibly manganese, that covered the entire body. In contrast, the Egyptians developed less invasive embalming methods. These included the natural dehydration of bodies and the use of resins and bandages, but without the extreme structural reconstruction practiced by the Chinchorro. In Tenerife, the Guanches, a native people of the Canary Islands, also practiced mummification of their dead, albeit to a lesser extent and using techniques reminiscent of Egyptian ones. However, unlike the Chinchorro, Guanche mummification was limited to figures of higher social status and generally did not include the meticulous restructuring of bodies as did the peoples of the Chilean desert. Unlike other cultures, the Chinchorro left no written records or monuments to explain their motivations behind this laborious practice. This raises a big question. Why would a fishing culture, whose life revolved around the ocean, dedicate so much time and resources to mummifying their dead? One theory suggests that these preserved bodies served as ancestral presences, being revered and possibly carried with tribe members on their journeys. There is also speculation that they could have been part of an ancestor cult, where mummified bodies were placed in places of honor during ceremonies or used to strengthen the community's collective identity. Bernardo Arriaza, an anthropologist and one of the foremost scholars of the Chinchorro culture, suggests that this rite may have had an emotional origin. In his studies, Arriaza argues that the high infant mortality rate attributed to the consumption of arsenic-contaminated water may have been a catalyst for families to seek ways to preserve and honor their deceased children. The proportion of child mummies is considerably high in the finds from the region, which reinforces this theory. However, the lack of a clear religious or mythological context leaves a void that has intrigued scholars and remains unsolved. Another mystery surrounds the natural preservation that the Atacama Desert climate allowed for these mummies. Unlike Egyptian tombs, which were built in temples and protected from the outside environment, the Chinchorro mummies were buried in shallow graves. The extreme aridity and soil composition allowed for partial natural mummification before artificial techniques were applied. Thus, the combination of environment and artificial techniques created a unique preservation process not seen in other cultures. Could it have been this characteristic of the desert that inspired the Chinchorro to develop their elaborate mummification techniques? Or perhaps there was something deeper, a belief in the power of the earth itself, that led them to perpetuate these practices for thousands of years. Like Egyptian mummies, Chinchorro mummies reveal an obsession with preserving the body, although the reasons and methods differ significantly. However, some compare the detailed work of Chinchorro mummies to another type of ritual mummification in the Andes, such as the Inca mummies of children sacrificed in the Capacocha rituals. These mummies, found on mountaintops thousands of meters high, were preserved by extreme cold in a kind of natural mummification. Although the cultural contexts are different, both practices reflect a deep connection with the environment and a devotion to preserving the physical body, perhaps as a channel for the spirit. But while the Egyptians embalmed their dead for the journey to the afterlife, the reason why the Chinchorro preserved theirs remains a mystery. Some archaeologists suggest that Chinchorro mummification may have been a way to retain the dead among the living, maintaining them as a physical and tangible presence. Perhaps this ancient civilization believed that the dead could protect the living? Or perhaps it was a way to preserve the essence of their loved ones, keeping them ever present in the community. According to the accounts accepted by traditional archaeology, the Americas were populated exclusively by migrations from Siberia, who crossed Beringia during the Pleistocene. This theory held that all Native American peoples descended from these groups, except for two later migrations that gave rise to the Nadine and the Eskimo-Aleut peoples. But there was a problem. The evidence didn't quite fit. Some proposed alternative routes. Robert Stanford, Bruce Bradley, Thor Heyerdahl, all of them pointed to technological similarities, navigational capabilities, and scattered clues that suggested much older transoceanic contacts. For years, they were ignored. In a study analyzing 23 ancient genomes from the Americas, one result stood out like a beacon in the night. A Chinchorro mummy from northern Chile, dated between 3,972 and 3,806 BCE, showed between 30% and 40% European ancestry. The analyses left no room for doubt. They all converged on the same conclusion. That DNA wasn't Siberian, it wasn't Asian, it was European. But even more unsettling, and it was pre-last glacial, maximum European. We're talking about populations like the Aurignacians, the Gravettians, and perhaps even the Solutrean. The genetic models revealed a pattern impossible to ignore. In the analysis, the Chinchorro mummy consistently showed a European component that only appeared in Europeans from before the last glacial maximum, which ended around 10,000 BC. Components present in Europeans since the Copper Age, and which would have indicated modern contamination, did not appear in the Chinchorro mummy. If this DNA really did arrive in America thousands of years before the Vikings, who were its carriers? Genetics points to the Solutreans, a European Upper Paleolithic people known for their advanced stone tool technology. Some researchers have suggested that during the Ice Age they may have traveled along the edge of the North Atlantic ice, thousands of years before any historical navigation. Other genetic models, however, do not rule out the Aurignacians or Gravettians, even older groups. But whoever their origin, there is a troubling point. If they arrived around 26,000 years ago, then 20,000 years of genetic drift separated them from the Chinchorro mummy, enough time for their descendants to dilute, mix, and adapt to a new continent. This discovery is more than just a genetic curiosity. It is the first ancient genetic evidence of prehistoric transatlantic contact in the Americas. It forces us to rethink history, to reconsider migrations that traditional archaeology denied for decades, to understand that oceans, even in prehistory, could be pathways, not barriers. The Chinchorro mummy, encased in clay and time, held a secret for millennia. Now its DNA reveals a different, more complex, older narrative, a story in which the Americas and Europe touched much earlier than previously imagined.